So I had someone in our comment section ask as to why I would rather use a Bader belt sander than a lathe for removing weld material off of a receiver where I fix some holes. And the theory behind that is very sound and logical. You'd use a bigger machine. You could take it off of there much more rapidly rather than doing it by hand. The problem is, in the real world, that's just not how it works. There's a big difference between internet theory and keyboard gunsmithing versus getting the job done, doing it right the first time, and making it look perfect. We're going to discuss that and a lot more in today's episode of Keyboard Gunsmithing. So stick with us. So today I wanted to go over what I'm terming keyboard gunsmithing and why what sounds good in theory absolutely has no legs in the workshop, and why it might even be dangerous or it would just take too long. And it's not that they're bad questions or anything like that. Some of the questions are actually really good and the comments are really good. So one of the recurring themes that I was being asked is why I wouldn't use a lathe to work down any weld deposits that I put on a barrel or a receiver. And I totally get how the theory behind that, or the thought behind that, makes perfect sense. It should be faster. You'd be able to work it down, get it perfect, and not have to do a lot of handwork. The reality, though, is much different than that, and I'll just do a little explanation here why. So if you have, looking at a receiver edge on, if this is the inside portion that's threaded, and this is the outside of your receiver, now if you can use your imagination here.
With imagination.
With that horrible circle, to just imagine that this is concentric all the way around the inside, and one were to put a big lump of weld on there, that, yeah, you could fixture the front and the back, and if everything were centered, you could spin it, you could turn that down and work that right in with the rest of the, the outside of the barrel material. The problem starts with the fact that, people assume that firearms, everything is like really concentric and level and square on them, and it is not. A lot of times what you're going to end up with is your threaded hole is going to be, I'm going to make this a little bit more dramatic, and my circle's not very round, so bear with me, but it's going to be eccentric. It's going to be offset. So at that point, how would you set that up? Would you put something in the threaded center here and run it into your headstock and, I don't know, use a 4-jaw chuck and offset it, try to get it to turn true? Even if you got it to turn true at that point, yeah, okay, you could turn it. I mean, do you try to clamp on the outside of the receiver? The time to set something like that up would be insane. And how would you even do something like that on, say, like a receiver like this, where, you have a matted rib on top, or, there's a flat spot on the back, or like a 1917 receiver where you have the lug, the boss on the outside of the receiver. And again, this one has already been modified, but you have a flat top. Or like on a regular military gun where you have this huge rear sight. Using a lathe is just, again, the idea is valid, but the reality is greatly different than that. So hopefully that helped explain a little bit on why doing this kind of work by hand is really the only easy way to do it. Now, I use a giant Bader belt sander, and that makes it go way faster than if you were to do it all by hand with, just purely by emery paper and files. But that's what makes this hard. It's hard to do it by hand using equipment like that and get the proper results. It's not easy. It takes a lot of time to master the craft of being able to polish. Read Colt, A Century of Achievement. Read what they talked about in there with how long it takes a polisher to be a master polisher, someone that they could trust to polish their firearms, and nobody polished firearms better than Colt. Maybe some did it as well, but nobody did it better. So I think, when they talk about how long it took and the years of dedication to polish, that speaks volumes in and of itself. So that's the reality. It takes a lot of time. People always have asked me for years, I'd love to see how, your restorations, I'd love to see how you do it. And I'm going to tell you something right now. You probably wouldn't. You'd probably get really bored really fast. If you've been watching my videos where I'm actually doing the polishing, a lot of it is, you're covered with, your hands are black and gritty and you're working a file and it's just monotony. There's not fancy equipment. There's nothing really special. It is basic hand tools, the magic and the skill, the romance of what you think is creating that restoration isn't through fancy materials and fancy tools. It comes from an understanding of how it's done. It's mastering a craft over years of applying that over and over and over again and developing a feel in your hands and just having that touch that works with your eye. And you only get that through hours and hours and hours at a bench polishing and standing at a machine polishing. All right, so moving on to our next questions. So I got a lot of questions on the video I did where I fixed a 43 receiver. And I think most of these questions are probably that I'm going to talk about today are going to come off of that, because there was just a lot of opinions on what's right and what's wrong. And one of the first ones that I'm going to cover is more about maybe a technical nature. And I've had a couple people ask why I'm not using an inverter or suggesting that an inverter is a much better welder than the welder that I'm using. Well, I have an inverter, and the inverter welder that I have, I think it's the Miller Multimatic 235. Now that one does not have high frequency, so it's a touch to start. And what that basically means is you take your tungsten, you put it on the metal, and then when you draw off, the arc establishes. It's a great way to weld and establish an arc, but I like the high frequency feature, and that one doesn't have it. And I just don't feel that going out and buying another welder that is an inverter just to have the high freak is going to offer me anything that an old transformer based system welder wouldn't offer. And it's not that inverters are bad, and they've gotten a lot better over the years. I've used them back in the 90s, and I can tell you those early ones were very frantic and hectic. They were not good to use. So I know this is a little bit of a side story, but it's probably maybe more younger people that are not exposed to the older machines that maybe they don't have a reference of how the older ones work compared to the newer ones. But I can tell you some of that newer inverter technology was not that great in the like in the 90s and early 2000s. I've used it, and most people didn't like it back then. And furthermore, ask an old pipeliner about an SA200, the old Lincoln machines, and how well they weld, and if they would give one of those up for any inverter system. I'm thinking maybe not. I could be wrong. You guys can let me know in the comment on that one. But anyway, inverters, great technology. I have them, I use them, but I'm perfectly happy with my old transformer-based Synchrowave for doing, most of the welding that I do. Another one, there's a lot of comments on tungstens and why I would use one tungsten over another. Now I know for some reason there was a few comments where people thought I was using AC welding on that. AC is never what you want to use for carbon steel welding. It's always DC electrode negative. So there's examples where you would maybe change some stuff around, but I'm just talking like for the work that we're using here. I don't know why they maybe thought I was using AC. AC has a very unique sound to it. Either way, nope, DC electrode negative, and that's all I use for that type of work on carbon steel. Stainless steel as well, but AC is for aluminum. Tungsten, I know people had commented on, no, don't use the red tungsten and all that, it's radioactive. Okay, yeah, but maybe if I run out of red tungsten in the future, I'll go to gray. I've had some people comment I should be using green tungsten, and green tungsten is not what you want to be using for DC carbon steel welding. It will ball up. You'll get a wandering, straying arc. It'll be all over the place. So for any of you wanting to try welding and TIG or heliarc for the old people in the crowd, don't use a green tungsten. Red, Ceriated, Thoriated, Ceriated, any of those will work fine and shouldn't give you any kind of a problem. Let's see, another one related to welding. Shouldn't you have preheated the steel on the receiver to prevent stress and cracking? No, do not ever preheat your steel when welding on a receiver or a gun barrel. You will drive that arc straight down through way deeper than you normally would if you just start at room temperature. Preheat treat and post-weld heat treat, you just don't need them for filling holes in a receiver. Your whole idea here is to get in and get out as quick as possible with not affecting a large amount of area with heat. So preheating and cooling it down slower, you can. I found no benefit to that from a kind of a structural thing or anything. I mean, it's not cracking or anything as it's cooling. So I don't see where that would be a benefit, but yeah, my suggestion is do not preheat anything, like using a temp stick and all that and preheating before welding. Don't do it. Just get in there, fill the hole, get it done and get out. So that's a big one that I find. There were a lot of comments about the weld deposit in the welded area creating a dangerous situation in where it may remove heat treating and all of that. Yeah, it does. So does case color hardening. I always get requests about case color hardening bolts, bolt action rifles, especially Mausers. And when you look at the average thickness of that, especially if it had been case colored once before. Now, the idea behind case coloring is you have a hardened outer surface with a malleable core. Well, okay, that may very well be the case, but what happens if your case coloring you're recase coloring something that was always already hardened? What about a modern firearm that's been heat treated, a 40 series steel that's been heat treated and quenched, and now you're going to case color it? That hardening is going to drive clear through that receiver, and yet nobody seems worried about that. And a lot of people do seem to get hung up about welding holes up. I don't understand that concept. I understand the reason for being concerned about the safety of welding holes and all that stuff, but to be concerned about that, but then not think anything about taking one of these things and heating it up to case hardening temperatures and quenching it in cold water. They're not worried about that heat treating and brittling. And if you're going to worry about hardness and through hardening and crystalline structure of the steel, that is way, way, way more detrimental to the steel than welding a couple holes, drilled out holes for a scope mount. So proof marking, another big issue on that video was proof marking, where I took it and I re-proof marked the receiver and the barrel with the Winchester proof marks. And the first thing I'm going to cover is some people were throwing out the idea of being fraudulent or fraud. Now, in this country, there is no requirement for proof mark, and those proof marks are there. They're just there. Did the manufacturers proof test their stuff? Perhaps. Did they proof test every single 94 Winchester as it came across the line with a proof load? I'm thinking probably not. at all. I'm sure they've all done testing on their units and all of that stuff, but the idea of shooting every single gun with a proof load to proof test it, that's just not how it's done here. It is my belief, and I'm just saying as my belief, these manufacturers did not specifically proof test every single one of these. So that's on the legality of the whole proofing thing. I'm going to dovetail that into this one here is a cartridge conversion. How many people have a new barrel put on a rifle from a barrel blank? You take a barrel blank, you turn it down, or you buy it pre-contoured, you chamber it, you thread it, you put the sights on it. Is that proof tested? Who's proof testing it? Is your average gunsmith or restoration shop sending it to a proof house to have it proof tested with a proof gun? No. And I know many gunsmiths and many gun shops that are doing barrel alterations constantly. Replacement barrels, do you think every replacement barrel is proofed? Absolutely not. So I understand the idea behind it, but these things just aren't getting proofed like that. The third thing I want to touch on with putting proof marks and markings in general back on, replacing proof marks, replacing barrel marks, and markings in general in restoration is a very common standard practice. It is what separates proper restoration from just refinishing. If you were to take a Colt 1911 that has damage, you polish it down, all the markings are weak on the slide, or maybe some of them go away, they have to be put back on there. We're not putting markings on firearms that weren't there. Faking a gun is converting a low model firearm into something that's a rare example. And that's just not what's happening. We're putting back exactly what came off of there, and we're adding nothing to it and nothing more. So again, this is going to be my opinion on this matter. That is not faking at all. That is restoration and putting something back that was removed through the act of restoration. I mean, who of you out there wants to pay a high-end restoration fee to have your Winchester 86 restored with a new barrel and then not have the caliber markings or the address markings on it? That's just ludicrous. And it just wouldn't even look good. So anyway, enough said on that. So anyway, that's just a few comments that I wanted to go over with and maybe dispel any myths in a sense that that's just not right. That's just not accurate information. I wanted to clarify some things and set straight for the record exactly how some things are done. Now, other shops may very well have other methods on how they use it and maybe different viewpoints and approaches. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly fine. These are my methods from over 40 years of experience now of doing this stuff. And this is how it's done in my shop to give the customer exactly what they're asking for and doing things in a manner that is consistent and safe. So if you have any questions with anything that I covered here today or any further questions that you'd like to see me cover, go ahead, leave them in the comments below. I go through the comments and I read the comments. So I always welcome them and enjoy viewer participation. So until we see you next time at the bench or at the range, take care and happy shooting.